Ulbranin Desmond Doss. They said no man survives artillery fire unarmed. He saved 17 before dawn. The first shell screams overhead just after midnight, and Private First Class Desmond Doss feels the cliff edge beneath his boots crumble slightly as the explosion tears into the southern face of Hacksaw Ridge. Rock and coral spray into the air 30 yards away, backlit by orange fire that vanishes as quickly as it appeared. The concussion wave pushes him backward against the jagged limestone wall where he's crouched, his aid bag pressed tight against his ribs, his helmet rattling against his skull. 20 yards ahead, barely visible through drifting smoke and the absolute darkness of the Okinawa night, someone is screaming for help, voice raw, desperate, fading with each passing second. Then another shell lands, and another. The Japanese gunners have found their range. Doss closes his eyes for half a heartbeat and whispers the same prayer he's repeated 100 times since climbing this cursed ridge in late April 1945. Lord, just help me get one more. Just one more. His hands are shaking, not from cold, though the night air bites through his soaked uniform, but from something deeper. Fear, maybe, or the knowledge that what he's about to do makes no tactical sense whatsoever. The company commander's order had been clear an hour ago. Pull back to the base of the ridge, regroup, wait for dawn and air support before attempting another evacuation. It was the only logical choice. 17 men were still scattered across the plateau above, some wounded, some trapped in foxholes by overlapping machine gun fire, all of them invisible in the darkness. A night rescue under sustained artillery bombardment was suicide. No man survives artillery fire in the open. Certainly not unarmed, certainly not a combat medic whose only weapons are bandages, morphine, syrettes, and stubborn faith. But Doss had heard the wounded calling from up there, voices drifting down through the smoke and rain, pleading, terrified, and something inside him had simply refused to accept leaving them until morning. So when the officer turned to coordinate the withdrawal, Doss quietly checked his remaining supplies, tightened the straps on his aid bag, and slipped over the ridge lip into the killing ground above. Now, 300 yards from relative safety and surrounded by darkness broken only by shell flashes, he wonders if faith and stubbornness are enough to survive what's coming. The artillery falls in methodical patterns, walking barrages that sweep back and forth across the plateau like an invisible scythe. Doss has maybe 30 seconds between impacts to move, find cover, locate the wounded, and begin the impossible work of dragging them back to the cliff edge where a single frayed rope, barely thicker than his wrist, scorched at one end from an earlier incendiary round, hangs over the precipice into darkness. He presses himself flat against the coral outcropping as another shell detonates close enough to shower him with hot fragments. His ears ring, his mouth tastes like copper and smoke, and somewhere ahead, muffled by the roar, he hears it again. Medic, medic, please. Doss takes a breath, then crawls forward into the fire. The first man he finds is Corporal Hayes from Georgia, half buried in loose coral and mud, where the last shell carved a new crater into the plateau. Hayes recognizes Doss even in near total darkness. Maybe the silhouette of the helmet with no rifle slung across the back, maybe something in the way Doss moves, and starts crying. Not from pain, though his left leg is shattered below the knee and twisted at an angle that makes Doss's stomach tighten. Hayes cries because someone came back, because he's not alone anymore in the dark, with the artillery walking closer. You came, Hayes whispers, voice breaking. You actually came back up here. Doss doesn't answer. His hands are already moving, morphine syrette into the thigh, tourniquet above the fracture, pressure dressing wrapped tight and tied off. He works fast, knowing the pattern, feeling the rhythm in his bones. 3 seconds between impacts, shifting west to east, then reversing. It's not science. It's desperation wrapped in prayer and the faint hope that God might give him just enough time to get this one man to the rope, then go back for another. He drags Hayes into the crater, props him against the sloped wall, and whispers instructions to stay low and wait. Then he's crawling again, following the sounds, following the cries, following something deeper than orders or tactics, following the unbearable weight of knowing that if he doesn't go, no one else will. If stories like this make you imagine what you'd do under fire, tell us in the comments how you think you'd react in this situation, and stay with us for the next chapters. The plateau of Hacksaw Ridge stretches out in front of Doss like a shattered moonscape. Shell craters overlapping shell craters, broken tree stumps jutting at twisted angles. The ground torn open and rearranged by weeks of bombardment until no one can quite remember what the terrain looked like before the fighting started. He moves between the impacts, staying low, navigating by sound and the faint afterglow of explosions that briefly light the smoke-filled air. His knees are already raw from crawling over coral and rock. His uniform is soaked through, half rain, half the muddy water pooled in every depression, and the cold is starting to work its way into his muscles. He finds Private Kellerman 20 yards from Hayes, chest wound, sucking air with each shallow breath, blood mixing with rainwater in the foxhole where he's curled on his side. Doss seals the wound with a field dressing wrapper, tapes it down tight, and rolls Kellerman onto his side so he won't drown in his own blood. Kellerman's eyes are wide, panicked, searching Doss's face in the darkness for some confirmation that he's going to live. "Am I gonna make it?" Kellerman asks, voice barely above a whisper. "You're gonna make it," Doss says, though he has no idea if that's true. "Just keep breathing slow, I'll get you down." He doesn't mention that down means dragging him 200 yards across open ground under artillery fire to reach a rope that might not hold their combined weight. He doesn't mention that the cliff edge is exposed to sniper fire from the Japanese positions dug into the northern slope. He just squeezes Kellerman's shoulder, then moves on to the next cry for help. The second man is Sergeant Rourke, unconscious with a fractured skull and a pulse so faint Doss can barely find it. He wraps Rourke's head in every remaining clean bandage he has, then marks the location in his mind. Another man to come back for when he's moved the ones who can still speak. The third and fourth are 2 riflemen sharing a foxhole, both hit by shrapnel, holding each other and whispering the Lord's Prayer in broken, stuttering voices. Doss gives them morphine, checks their wounds, painful but not immediately life-threatening, and tells them to stay put until he can organize an evacuation route. Back near the cliff edge, Lieutenant Grayson crouches behind a shattered stump with 3 other soldiers, all of them staring at Doss like he's a ghost. Grayson had given the withdrawal order. Grayson had watched Doss disappear into the smoke and assumed, like everyone else, that the medic wouldn't last 5 minutes up here alone in the dark under this kind of fire. "Doss! What the hell are you doing?" Grayson hisses, voice tight with something between anger and disbelief. "I ordered everyone down an hour ago." "I know, sir," Doss says quietly, catching his breath, "but there's men still up here. 17, maybe more. Can't leave them. You can't save them all by yourself. Not like this." "Don't have to save them all at once," Doss replies, glancing at the rope hanging over the cliff edge, the frayed, scorched lifeline that's their only way down. "Just one at a time." Grayson stares at him, then at the rope, then back at the plateau where the artillery continues its methodical destruction. He's a good officer, careful, responsible, trained to weigh risks and costs, and every part of his training tells him that what Doss is proposing is tactically insane. But he's also seen what Doss has done in previous actions on this ridge, seen him move through fire that stopped everyone else, seen him refuse to leave wounded, even when it meant crawling back into hell. "That rope won't hold," one of the soldiers mutters. "It's half burned through already." "It'll hold," Doss says, though he's not sure. "It has to. He doesn't wait for permission." He's already turning back toward the plateau, already counting the wounded in his head, already calculating how many trips it will take and whether dawn will come before he's finished. The artillery pauses, just for a moment, maybe 30 seconds of silence that feels heavier than the explosions. And in that silence, Doss hears them all calling. Voices scattered across the darkness, each one a name, a face, a life hanging by a thread thinner than the rope at the cliff edge. Grayson watches him go, then turns to the others. "Stay here. If he brings someone to the rope, help lower them down. And someone get on the radio. Tell the aid station we're going to need stretcher bearers standing by all night." No one argues. They've learned by now that arguing with Desmond Doss is pointless. The man simply doesn't stop. By 0200 hours, Doss has moved 6 men to the cliff edge. Each trip takes between 15 and 25 minutes, crawling out to locate the wounded, stabilizing them enough to survive being moved, then dragging them back across ground that shifts and crumbles with every new shell impact. His hands are numb from gripping wet fabric and muddy limbs. His back screams from the effort of hauling grown men across broken terrain. Blood from a dozen minor shrapnel wounds mixes with rain and sweat until his uniform is stiff with it. The rope holds, barely. Each time Doss ties a crude harness around an unconscious soldier and lowers him over the edge, the fibers groan and stretch and shed tiny wisps of burned hemp into the darkness. Grayson and the others catch the wounded at the bottom, 20 feet below, then carry them to the aid station where Doc Brennan, a weathered captain with hands that shake from exhaustion and too much coffee, triages them under the dim glow of kerosene lanterns. Brennan doesn't sleep anymore. He's processed over 200 casualties from Hacksaw Ridge since the 77th Infantry Division started this nightmare assault in late April, and every night brings more shattered limbs, more sucking chest wounds, more boys who should be in college or working their father's farms instead of bleeding out on a Pacific island they'd never heard of 6 months ago. Tonight is worse because the wounded keep arriving one at a time, instead of in organized batches, each one lowered from the darkness above on a rope that Brennan is certain will snap any minute. "Who's still up there?" Brennan asks when Grayson appears with Corporal Hayes slung across his shoulders. "Doss," Grayson says quietly. "Just Doss." Brennan stares at him. "The medic? The one who won't carry a rifle? That's the one. He's going to get himself killed." "Probably," Grayson agrees. "But he won't stop. You know how he is." Brennan does know. He's seen Doss before, seen the quiet stubbornness, the way the kid moves through combat zones like he's walking to church, the way he prays before touching a wounded man as if asking permission from something greater than tactics or training. Brennan doesn't share Doss's faith, but he respects it. Respects the fact that in a war defined by who can kill most efficiently, one man has somehow survived by refusing to kill at all. Up on the ridge, Doss finds the 7th man, Private Chen, 19 years old, hit in both legs and the abdomen, fading in and out of consciousness. Chen's eyes flutter open when Doss touches his shoulder, and for a moment there's recognition, then confusion. "You're the medic," Chen whispers, "the one who doesn't carry a gun." "That's right. How are you still alive?" Doss doesn't have an answer. He just gives Chen morphine, wraps the abdominal wound as tight as he dares, and starts dragging him toward the cliff edge. The artillery fire is intensifying now, the Japanese gunners adjusting their aim, tightening the pattern, searching for targets in the smoke and darkness. Shells land close enough to throw Doss sideways twice, close enough that he tastes blood from a bitten tongue, close enough that he wonders if the next one will be the one that doesn't miss. But he keeps moving. Because stopping means Chen dies. Stopping means the men still scattered across the plateau die. Stopping means he has to live with the knowledge that he could have saved them and chose not to try. Back at the cliff edge, one of the soldiers, a rifleman named Kowalski, who once mocked Doss for refusing to carry a weapon, helps tie the harness around Chen's unconscious form. Kowalski's hands are shaking, but his voice is steady. "How many more?" he asks. 10, Doss says. "Maybe 11. Jesus, Doss. You can't keep doing this all night. Watch me." Kowalski stares at him for a long moment, then nods. There's no mockery now, no jokes about faith or weakness or the medic who won't fight. Just quiet, exhausted respect for something Kowalski doesn't fully understand but can no longer ignore. "Tanor, would you follow the orders exactly, or trust what your own eyes and instincts tell you in a moment like this? Comment which path you'd take, and share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history. The rope becomes everything. It's no longer just a piece of equipment. It's the thin line between 17 lives and 17 bodies left to be recovered after dawn. Doss can feel it fraying under his palms each time he lowers another man, can see the burned section near the top growing darker and more threadbare with every trip. The cliff edge is slick with rain and mud, and more than once he nearly loses his grip, nearly sends both himself and the wounded soldier plunging 20 feet to the rocks below. By 03:30 hours, he's moved 13 men. His hands are bleeding, torn open by rope fibers and sharp coral, the blood making his grip even more uncertain. His legs tremble from exhaustion. His vision blurs at the edges, and he's not sure anymore if it's from fatigue or the concussive pressure of explosions that keep hammering the plateau. He's run out of morphine. He's down to his last 2 field dressings. He's improvising tourniquets from strips of uniform fabric and using pieces of shattered wood as splints. The 14th man is Sergeant Rourke, the one with the fractured skull that Doss found hours ago and has been checking on between trips. Rourke is still unconscious, barely breathing, his pulse weak and irregular. Doss knows the chances of him surviving the descent are low, knows that a fall could kill him instantly, but leaving him isn't an option. He drags Rourke to the edge, ties the harness with hands that won't stop shaking, and begins the descent. Halfway down, the rope groans. Doss freezes, feet braced against the cliff face, Rourke's unconscious weight pressed against his chest. For 10 seconds that stretch into eternity, they hang suspended in darkness. Nothing but frayed hemp and faith between them and the rocks below. Doss can hear the individual fibers snapping, can feel the rope shifting and stretching under the combined weight. He closes his eyes and whispers the prayer again, the same words he's repeated 100 times tonight. Just one more, Lord. Just let me get one more down. The rope holds. At the bottom, Grayson and Kowalski catch Rourke, their faces pale in the dim light of a shielded lantern. They don't speak. They just carry him toward the aid station while Doss climbs back up, hand over hand, ignoring the pain in his palms and the burning in his shoulders. 3 more men, just 3 more. The 15th and 16th come together, 2 riflemen who'd been sharing a foxhole, both hit by the same mortar round, both refusing to be separated. Doss brings them one at a time, moving faster now because dawn is maybe 90 minutes away and daylight will bring snipers and the risk that the Japanese will launch a counterattack across the plateau. The 17th man is Private Chen, the one Doss had already moved once, the one he'd left in a shell crater near the cliff edge while he went back for others. But when Doss returns, Chen isn't where he left him. The artillery has shifted the crater's shape, collapsing one wall and exposing Chen to direct fire from the northern slope. Chen is conscious now, whimpering, trying to drag himself toward cover with legs that won't work. Doss finds him 20 yards from the rope, out in the open, visible in the pale pre-dawn light that's starting to creep across the ridge. A sniper round cracks past, close enough that Doss hears the supersonic snap before the distant rifle report. He doesn't think. He just runs, sprinting across open ground, diving into the crater beside Chen, covering the younger man's body with his own, as another round impacts the coral nearby. "I got you," Doss whispers, though his voice is shaking and he's not sure if he's trying to reassure Chen or himself. "I got you. We're going down together." He drags Chen the final 20 yards, both of them crawling now, both of them expecting the sniper round that will end it. But it doesn't come. Maybe the sniper loses sight of them in the smoke. Maybe God intervenes. Maybe it's just luck. Doss doesn't care. He just ties the harness around Chen one final time, checks the knot twice, and begins the last descent. The rope is barely holding. Doss can feel it failing, individual strands breaking, the whole line vibrating with tension. 10 feet from the bottom, it starts to slip. Doss braces his feet against the cliff face and wraps the rope around his forearm. taking Chen's full weight for the final 5 seconds it takes to get him to the ground. When Grayson catches Chen and Doss collapses onto solid ground at the base of the cliff, the rope finally gives up. The frayed section snaps with a soft whisper of parting fibers, and the whole line tumbles down the cliff face like a dying snake. Doss watches it fall, then closes his eyes. 17 men, all down, all breathing. The official after-action report, typed 3 days later by a clerk who'd never climbed the ridge, summarized the night in 4 clean sentences. During sustained enemy artillery bombardment on the night of 5th May 1945, PFC Desmond T. Doss, Medical Detachment, 307th Infantry, 77th Infantry Division, evacuated 17 wounded personnel from exposed positions on Hacksaw Ridge. Despite grave personal risk and without benefit of protective fire support, PFC. Doss lowered the wounded by rope to positions of relative safety. This action demonstrated extraordinary heroism and devotion to duty. Recommend for commendation. What the report didn't say, what Doss never told the clerk, never told the officers who later presented him with citations and medals, never told anyone, except in the quiet hours when sleep wouldn't come and the memory of that night played on repeat, was how close he'd come to stopping. How many times he'd crouched in a shell crater, hands shaking so badly he couldn't tie a bandage, whispering prayers that felt more like begging than faith. How he'd frozen completely when the 14th man, Sergeant Rourke, had nearly fallen because Doss's grip failed and he'd thought for one terrible moment, "I can't do this anymore. I can't keep going." That moment haunted him more than the artillery fire, more than the sniper rounds, more than the rope fraying in his torn hands. Because in that moment, suspended on the cliff face with Rourke's unconscious weight threatening to drag them both down, Doss hadn't felt heroic. He'd felt terrified. Terrified that his strength would fail. Terrified that his faith was just words in his head and nothing more. Terrified that he would be the reason another man died instead of the reason he lived. He'd prayed then, not the clean, confident prayers from his childhood in Lynchburg, Virginia, but something rawer and more desperate. "I can't do this. I can't. Please, I can't." And somehow, in that moment of absolute exhaustion and doubt, his hands had held. The rope had held. Rourke had reached the bottom alive. But Doss knew the truth. The citation would call it courage. The men would call it a miracle. And maybe it was both. But it also felt like stumbling blind through darkness and only realizing afterward how close he'd come to falling. 2 weeks later, Doc Brennan found Doss sitting alone behind the aid station, staring at his hands. The burns and rope cuts had mostly healed, but Doss kept flexing his fingers, opening and closing them, like he was testing to see if they still worked. "You all right?" Brennan asked. "Yeah," Doss said quietly. "Just thinking." "About what?" Doss was silent for a long moment. "Then about how many times I almost stopped that night. Almost gave up, almost decided 17 was impossible and I should just get myself down before the artillery got me too." Brennan sat down beside him. "But you didn't stop." "No." "Why not?" Doss looked up at the sky, clear blue, innocent, nothing like the smoke-filled darkness of that night. "Because if I'd stopped, they'd still be up there. And I couldn't live with that." Brennan nodded slowly. He'd seen enough combat to understand that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was doing the thing you were terrified to do, because not doing it would break something inside you that no medic could fix. "The men think you're some kind of saint," Brennan said. "You know that, right?" "I'm not," Doss replied immediately. "I was scared the whole time. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept thinking the next shell would be the one that killed me. But you went anyway." "I went because they were calling for help." Doss's voice was barely above a whisper, and I couldn't be the man who heard them calling and chose not to answer. That was the secret the citation didn't capture, that Desmond Doss hadn't climbed back onto Hacksaw Ridge that night because he was fearless or faithful or destined for heroism. He'd climbed back because the alternative, living with the knowledge that he could have tried and didn't, was worse than the artillery fire, worse than the darkness, worse than the rope that might snap at any second. Years later, when journalists and documentarians asked him about that night, Doss would give them the clean version, the prayer, the rope, the 17 men lowered one by one. But he rarely mentioned the moment on the cliff when his grip started to fail. The moment when courage looked less like strength and more like the desperate, trembling refusal to let go. The war ended 4 months later. Desmond Doss went home to Virginia with a Medal of Honor, a chest full of citations and wounds that ran deeper than the shrapnel scars on his hands and back. He married Dorothy, the girl he'd written letters to from Okinawa. He tried to build a normal life. But certain things stayed with him, things that had nothing to do with medals or official recognition. The smell of wet rope, the sound of artillery in distant thunder, the way rain on a tin roof could transport him back to that night on the ridge, heart pounding, hands shaking, hearing voices call medic from the darkness. He didn't talk about it much. When people asked, and they always asked, he gave them the version they wanted to hear. The faith, the prayer, the miracle of the rope holding. All of it was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that Private Chen, the last man Doss had lowered, the one he'd dragged across open ground while sniper rounds snapped past, wrote him a letter in 1947. Just a few lines on notebook paper, mailed from San Francisco, where Chen was working in his family's restaurant and trying to forget the war. The letter said, "I still don't understand how you came back for me. Everyone else was gone. It was just you and the artillery and the dark, but you came anyway. I think about that sometimes when I'm afraid of something. I think, if that medic could do what he did without a weapon, maybe I can do this small thing that scares me." Doss read that letter a dozen times, then put it in a drawer and didn't look at it again for 20 years, because it reminded him too much of the truth he'd never quite found words for, that the night on Hacksaw Ridge hadn't felt like heroism from the inside. It had felt like terror and duty tangled so tight he couldn't separate them. It had felt like moving forward, not because he was brave, but because stopping would have broken something inside him that no amount of faith could repair. The other secret, the one he carried most quietly, was that sometimes he still dreamed about the rope. In the dreams it always snapped, always failed. And he would wake up sweating, heart-racing, hands grasping at nothing, trying to hold on to something that was already falling. Dorothy learned not to wake him when the dreams came. She would just rest a hand on his shoulder and wait for him to surface on his own, back to the small bedroom in Lynchburg where no artillery fell and no one called for help in the darkness. In 1961, a young reporter from Life magazine came to interview him about the Medal of Honor. She was earnest and respectful, taking careful notes about his faith and his conviction and his refusal to carry a weapon. At the end, she asked the question everyone eventually asked: "What went through your mind that night when you kept going back up the ridge?" Doss was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I kept thinking about my hands. Whether they'd hold, whether the rope would hold, whether I could get one more man down before something gave out. The rope, or my strength, or my nerve. I prayed a lot, but mostly I just tried not to think about how scared I was." The reporter stopped writing. "You were scared, terrified," Doss said simply. "The whole time." She put down her pen. "But you did it anyway. I did it because they were up there, and I was the only one who could get to them, not because I was brave, because I was the only option they had." The article, when it ran, focused on the faith and the medal and the miracle of the rope. It barely mentioned the fear. That was fine with Doss. Let people have their heroes. Let them have the story they needed. He knew the truth. He knew what it had cost. He knew that heroism from the inside felt less like strength and more like the desperate, trembling act of holding on when everything in you wants to let go. Decades later, when Hacksaw Ridge became part of military history courses and documentaries, the story got simplified even further. One unarmed medic, 17 men, one impossible night. The numbers were accurate. The rest, the doubt, the terror, the moment on the cliff when his grip started to fail, stayed locked inside the memories of the men who'd been there. Desmond Doss died in 2006 at 87, surrounded by family and the quiet certainty of a faith that had sustained him through everything. Near the end, when the morphine made him drift in and out of consciousness, Dorothy thought she heard him whisper something that sounded like a prayer. Just one more. Just let me hold on for one more. She held his hand, scarred, worn, still marked by the rope burns from 61 years earlier, and whispered back, "You can let go now, Des. You held on long enough." The official record says PFC. Desmond T. Doss saved 75 men during the Battle of Okinawa. 17 of them on a single night, when artillery fire turned Hacksaw Ridge into hell, and one man with no weapon decided that terror was a price worth paying if it meant 17 soldiers went home instead of being left in the dark. But the real story, the one that lived in Doss's memory and the memories of the men he'd saved, was simpler and heavier. That courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the rope burn in your palms, the tremor in your hands, the prayer that sounds more like begging. The choice to go back one more time even when every part of you knows that the rope might not hold, that your strength might fail, that the next shell might be the one that ends it, and the quiet, terrible knowledge that you'll carry that night inside you for the rest of your life, not as legend, but as the weight of what it actually felt like to hold 17 lives on a fraying rope and refuse to let go. If this story reminded you that behind every medal there's a human being carrying memories we'll never fully see, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story.